This project shows you how to embellish a skirt with buttons and embroidered flowers that are enhanced with LEDs in the centre of each flower. It's quite a complex project and it does require some knowledge of how circuits are created, as well as some knowledge of how to do embroidery stitches. The skirt has a metal zip on the pocket just here, and the zip acts as a switch. So here you can see when I open the zip, the LEDs switch off, and when I close the zip, it joins the circuit and the LEDs switch on. The flowers are made from hand embroidered lazy daisy stitch, so these have been embellished onto the skirt, and in the centre there's a small button, a two-hole button through which the LED has been poked through. So when the LEDs are switched off, they just look like small translucent beads on the surface of the skirt. On this product, the zip is in the pocket, but it could be on any position on the item. The key thing to remember is that the teeth on the zip have got to be metal. As well as a skirt or other item with a zip in it, the things that you'll need are as follows. So we're going to need a mini cell holder and the cell that goes with it. We're going to need some LEDs. Here I've used some white LEDs, and they are 3mm ones. They give you a slightly sort of finer effect on the surface. We're also going to need some conductive thread to stitch our circuit with, to join all of those together. The embellishment, we're going to use some embroidery threads, and I can use any types of embroidery threads. Here I've got stranded embroidery threads, and I've used all 6 strands, but it's up to you depending on the finished appearance that you want for your item. Also using 4 buttons in similar colours, and the buttons have 2 holes in the centre, so it's where the LED legs are going to poke through the centre of the button. And finally, just some ordinary sewing thread, a similar colour to the product that you're making. This is a complex circuit, and it's made even more complicated by the fact you are working in quite a restricted area here, because it's underneath the pocket. Also, you've got the restrictions of where we're placing some of our items, because I ideally want my cell holder to go over in the on the side towards where the side seam is. It really depends on what your product is and where your zip is as to where you're going to put things, so you may well arrange your circuit in a slightly different way. One of the key things to remember is that the switch sits on the positive side. So here's my positive side, and my switch is going to sit on this side of the circuit. So this is going to be attached to the top of the zip. The other thing to remember is that these rows within the circuit must never cross over each other, and as there are several rows here, that can feel quite complicated. Just going to show you on paper how the circuit is constructed. This might help you to more easily understand the circuit when you come to stitch it, but also if you've got your zip and component parts in different positions, this might help you to adapt your own circuit yourself. So here we've got our zip pocket and the cell holder in the side seam with our LEDs laid out. We're going to start off with our stitching with the negative side of the circuit. So this black pen is the equivalent of the negative side of my stitching, sort of using my conductive thread. So I'm going to stitch from the cell holder across to the negative side of the LED. So going around to this LED, coming around to this one here, and finishing up with the final negative side of the LED over on the far side. So that's the first half of our circuit. Now I'm going to do the positive side of the circuit, and I'm going to use a red pen to indicate the conductive thread that's on the positive side. So I'm going to start off with the positive side of our LED over here, and again we're going to stitch around to each of the LEDs. So here we've got our LEDs joined together on the positive side of our circuit. We're then going to go up to our zip, and on the item that we're doing, we're going to go into the pocket to hide some of our stitching, and along to the top of the teeth just here. And we're going to do some stitching to attach the positive side of the stitches to the top of the zip. The last stage is to do the second half of the positive side of the circuit. So at the moment we've come up to here, and our zip is going to be the breaking connection, so that when we open the zip, the circuit will be broken and the LED will switch off. So we're going to join a new piece of thread onto this side of the zip, and then we're going to take the positive side of the circuit back over here to the cell holder, and I can either come this direction or in this direction around here. On my particular design for my skirt, I've got to come around this outside edge just because of the way my skirt has been designed, but I could come around here. It will be a shorter journey. So just notice all my different rows of threads are going to be apart from each other, and this is the how the stitch works, in that the zip is in the centre of the positive side of the circuit, and when I unzip that zip, it will break the connection and switch off the LED, zip it back up again, and it joins it, making the LED switch on. The first stage of making the skirt is to do the embellishment on the surface here. So here you can see I've done some flowers using stranded embroidery thread. I've used all 6 strands and used a stitch called lazy daisy stitch, which is basically individual chain stitches spread out to create a flower. I've left a central section in the middle where the button's going to go onto. My needle's in position on the back of the fabric, but I now need to get my button and my LED ready. So the LED is just going to, the legs are just going to go through the 2 holes in the button, and then the 2 legs are just going to be poked through the fabric. So you sort of need to wiggle them a little bit, sort of get them through. So on this particular fabric, you've got quite an open-ish type of weave, so the legs will pop through. If you don't have that sort of open fabric, or it's quite stiff, you may need to cut a hole just here. And if the fabric frays, you probably will just need to neaten that, because obviously otherwise your fabric's going to fray. Although if you do need to neaten it, your button will cover up any neatening stitches or perhaps fabric glue that you use to neaten it. I'm back on the wrong side of my fabric now, and here you can see that I've oversewn the negative side of the cell holder into position on the fabric. It's just near the side seam, and I could actually have attached it to the side seam, but here I've got a pocket and some lining, and therefore I can't do that, but I could attach it to the side seam if I had one. The oversewn stitches don't go through to the right side, so just have a quick look. You can just see that there's no visible stitches, so all I'm doing here is just picking up 1 or 2 threads from the fabric, just in order to hold it into position. The next stage will be to take the conductive thread down to the negative side, so this is just this one with the short leg just here, on my LED, and to do that I'm just, with my oversewn stitches, just going to just pick up 1 or 2 of the threads from the fabric, just to get down to where the LED is positioned. So I don't want to just take this straight over, because that's going to mean that this thread's going to sort of be loose on the fabric. And I don't want that, because it might droop and start to touch the other side of my circuit when I stitch that. So it's just a couple of stitches to hold it in position on the fabric. Using some round nose pliers, and just twisting the negative leg, so the shorter leg, oops, come off, down into to make a small loop, and then just pushing that to one side. I'm going to stitch that down in a moment using the conductive thread. The positive leg is still here. I'm just going to leave that until later on. Just doing some oversewing stitches just to hold the leg of the LED into position, and I'm stitching through the embroidery thread here. So on this occasion, rather than going through the skirt fabric, I'm just using the fact that I've got the embroidery stitches there already. It just means that I'm avoiding the risk of any of the stitches showing through onto the right side of the material. I'm then going to do the yellow flower next, so just the same as before. I'm just going to do some very small running stitches, just picking up 1 or 2 threads from the top layer of the fabric on the inside. And now I'm going to put another LED here, just in the same way as before, and oversew it into position. The negative side of my circuit is now complete, so here it is, and what I'm going to do now is just to twist each of these legs and stitch those down using oversewn stitches, joining them up with the running stitch, just as we did before. Just finishing off stitching the oversewn stitches on the last LED. So here you can see the positive side of the circuit, going round to the last flower. Now my end of my zip, so the opening end, is over here on the right side of my fabric. So I'm just going to take my thread up to the bottom edge of the pocket and just along the pocket here, just to allow me to get to the end of the zip, and using the fact that I've got quite a few layers that I can go into, again just to help me to avoid showing my stitches on the right side of the fabric, because I can actually just take it into that seam just there. So here it's not so important here that my stitches are invisible. Just unwrap it from on the sail holder there. I'm just taking it right to the very end, just to where my zip is, and then I'm going to poke it through to the right side of the fabric. So here I'm just sort of feeling through with my needle, just to and my fingers underneath, just to feel where the top of my zip is, so I can push my needle all the way through to the right side, and here it's landing at the top of my zip. Just turn it round so I can hold it again, and then I'm just going to do some over sewing stitches, just going to trap in between the very, very top of the teeth on the zip and the next prong down. I've now got over sewing stitches on the top of the one side of the zip, and I've just completed some over sewing stitches on the other side of the zip. And what will actually happen, this is all part of the positive side of the circuit, so when the zip closes the two will join back together to connect the circuit, and the LEDs will come on. So what I'm going to do now is just to take this thread through to the back of the fabric to go and finish off the circuit on the back of the material. Back on the wrong side of my fabric now, I'm just going to complete my circuit by bringing my thread back round here up to the positive side of my cell holder. So just using the same things I said before about picking up small amounts of thread from the backing fabric. And just bear in mind that this sort of loop of thread round here is going to be avoiding these sections of the circuit just here. We don't want them to be touching or crossing over. Here you can see where I've stitched that down now. The quicker route would have been to have gone sort of this direction here on the top to come down to the positive side of the cell holder. I can't do that on my skirt because of where the position of the pocket is. Final stage in the circuit is just to attach the positive side of the cell holder with your over sewing stitches to the back of the fabric. Notice I've got two other holes here. These aren't part of the circuit, they've not got the metal rings on them, which is what tells you it's part of the circuit. So these are just stabilising holes, so I could use just the ordinary sewing thread to hold those in place. I can actually leave those loose if I want to, but it can be useful to have those so that it doesn't sort of wobble about a little bit. Now the circuit's complete, we can just pop our cell into the cell holder with the positive side of the cell facing upwards into the cell holder itself. I just turn the skirt to the right side, and then when we close the zip, the two bits of stitching that we did at this top end here connect to join the circuit together, and our LEDs light up.